Hi guys, I can't believe this is our last video. It's kind of sad, but I'm also really ready to not do these anymore. But in general, I really loved hearing your guys' thoughts throughout this semester. I feel like just what Kendra was saying about how we have the longest videos out of any group is just really cool. And it really shows how much deep thoughts you guys really put into the videos. And I loved hearing all your guys' thoughts throughout this semester. So let's get on into it. So the reading was Psychospirituality and the Spiritual Quest by Brenner. And even though this is the last article, or the last reading, I'm going to tell you this right now. This reading confused the heck out of me as I was reading it. There were some points that I really liked, some points that I didn't, and a lot of points where I was just like, what does this mean? But yeah, so here are my thoughts. So my key takeaways is spirituality is the response to a deep and mysterious human yearning for self-transcendence and surrender. The yearning for surrender is motivated by something/someone bigger than ourselves. And to me, this is God, for sure. And I feel like the topic of surrender has been introduced in my life a lot lately. And Brenner primarily talks about yearning as like a holistic thing versus like pieces to a puzzle. So like yearning is kind of like giving your all, and that's kind of like allows us to fully experience God's grace and goodness is if we give him everything that we have. And I feel like this is something that I struggle with personally, and I know a lot of people struggle with this as well. And then, yeah, so like this yearning for surrender, it's really a quest, and it's a psychological and spiritual quest. And Brenner does emphasize the connection between psychology and spirituality, which is a topic that we've discussed this semester, and that I'll discuss more later. And then he also talks about how she, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just assumed it was like he or she, but I'm just going to use Brenner. I think it is a girl. I could be wrong. The New Testament exhibits characteristics of the whole persons, while the Old Testament is kind of like a psychology. I have it written down. It's a psychologies in the persons in their totality, and they stand relation and how it stands to relation to God, and how it can be understood in the light of this relationship. And then Brenner believes that the holistic being of humans involves the corporation of the body, soul, and spirit. And there's actually like a term for that. It's called like, I'm gonna suck at pronouncing things, but it's like die something. And then, however, like our spirituality, or psychospirituality, which is like, to me, this is like kind of the most important like quote in the entire chapter, was it correlates with our body, which has its origin in God, and our soul, which correlates with man. So it's kind of like, in a way, our psychospirituality is a gift, because our body is created by God, and well, we wouldn't be able to function without a body, and it's really ultimately a gift. And our soul, which correlates with man. I feel like that's a really interesting statement, just because I think it would be the other way around, but that's just my personal thing. But that's very interesting. And then Brenner also discusses psychological foundations by emphasizing that the mind and body are interconnected and contributes to the whole illness of a person. And honestly, while reading this part of the book, I thought I was going to completely disagree with it, because I'm like, okay, like as the applied health science major of the class, like normally these topics are like false, but like this one I actually really agreed with, and I really liked the way and the intentionality behind how Brenner approached this topic, because it was very sympathetic but also very informative, and I agreed with it. And then my favorite quote was on page 113, and it's only by helping the patient understand and experience the deeper unity of the personality that exists can significantly progress towards integration of personality be made. And I feel like the wording of this is extremely complicating. I feel like a lot of wordings throughout this text is really like, it's like kind of frustrating for me to kind of wrap my head around, just because to me it doesn't make sense. But I really like the intentionality behind this quote, just because it's like, however, like I believe that it is important to establish that trust, and we've been emphasizing that all semester. But however, like being able to help the patient understand the deeper unity of personality is also extremely important. So like, first off, you want to establish that trust, and then you want to use, and like that trust is made by the client confiding in the therapist about their lives, and because that's a really hard thing to do, and kind of integrating that personality, the integration of personality could be really beneficial. And it's not necessarily, honestly, I can see how this could be interpreted in a way of like, oh, changing the individual's personality, but I think in a more like positive light, it's more of like trying to ultimately make them a better person, because sometimes, well, you go into therapy if there's something wrong or something difficult that's occurring, and it causes a conflict within your mind, and maybe your interpretation of that conflict can be changed throughout therapy, and it will allow you to grow from that situation and grow as a person. So I feel like the integration of personality can be really beneficial for clients who question their spirituality or have no religious association whatsoever. Because I feel like the ultimate goal from an atheistic like perspective, or trying to imagine like an atheist therapist, would be like to ultimately allow the client to grow and become a better person. And that's like, if I was a therapist, that would be my goal with all my clients, whether it was religiously or not. But yeah, the integration of personality is a transformative experience, and I feel like that will allow psychological growth. And since Brenner was emphasizing that direct correlation with psychology and spirituality, it'll allow them to have some sort of foundation spiritually, which I find really interesting. And then, do I agree with the author's perspective? I feel like I said earlier, I feel like there was a mix between like confusion, things that I agree with, and things that I didn't agree with. I feel like there was never anything in between those three, or like something different than those three. For the first point that I agreed with was the direct correlation between psychology and spirituality. And we talked about this once before in a reading that we had. I don't remember since it was so long ago, but I definitely agree with that link between psychology and spirituality. And if you have a strong foundation spiritually, it'll enhance your psychological like mindset. Sorry, that sounded really wrong. And vice versa. So if it's like in a negative way, it will impact negatively, and vice versa. So that's just really interesting to me. But the thing that I didn't agree with was basically the description of the New Testament that I talked about, how there's characteristics of a whole person. And the reason why I don't agree with this is like just Jesus's character. Like, we are able to see the mature adult Jesus, and that Jesus is an amazing individual. He saved us from our sins. He's ultimately very wise, compassionate, loving, and just overall a great human being. However, there is so much of Jesus' life that is undocumented and not included in the New Testament. So it's like, how are we able to see the whole character or the whole characteristics of someone without knowing the whole story? And I feel like this is just like an important life lesson to all our relationships or certain situations, even if you're like experiencing drama or all that. Like, you should know every side of the story in order to get this whole perspective of something. And I feel like knowing the whole perspective of something gives us totality. And even though that's like drama and all that, but it also really ties into like, we don't know Jesus' character fully just because we don't know the whole story. Like, there's so much of like Jesus' childhood that isn't documented in the Bible, and I feel like if it was, it would allow the next generation of children be able to kind of grow in Christ-likeness from a certain stage, versus like trying to get to that point when Jesus is a mature adult, because that's two very different developmental stages. So I feel like I just like wonder about a lot of things in Jesus's childhood in general, and unfortunately we don't have the answers for that. But yeah, that's kind of my thought process with that. And then, how does this information relate to your own experiences and beliefs? There's like a quote on the last page. I'm gonna pull that up. And it has to do with compartmentalization and how it creates disunity. And I feel like this applies to my experiences just because I used to be someone that would hide my feelings away. And because I did that, it totally ate me up. And I felt disconnected not only from my peers around me, but also myself. And I feel like this is perfectly encapsulated in this chapter of how it creates disunity. And because of my experience, I decided to be more open with my emotions, and I know that like scares a lot of people, but it's really important that everyone knows how you're feeling, and it's important for yourself to be honest with yourself as well, because if you're not like honest with others, like how can you be honest with yourself? Or like how can you be honest with yourself? Yeah, I think that's what I was like trying to go with that. I feel like honesty is really the important, like it's kind of the escape route for compartmentalization. If you are hiding yourself away from your worst fears or the worst confrontations or anything, allowing yourself to be honest, it really is the key to having a more united self and being more united with your peers. And that's kind of my take on that. And then a question that I will pose for a larger group. I have two, but I'm just going to pick one just because I'm already talking for too long. But on page 110, let me go back. It says, humans are not a composite of a number of parts. We do not have a spirit or have a body. We are embodied spirits. And I just want to know what you guys think of that quote, just because, again, the wording is making me think way too hard about this, and I'm just like, I'm never going to find a conclusion about this unless I hear it from someone else, just because it's like, humans, we do not have a spirit or have a body. We are embodied spirits. That's kind of how I interpreted that. I'm like, those are like kind of the same thing, right? So I just want to hear your thoughts about that. I can't wait to hear your guys' thoughts. I'm so sad that this is our last video. But like I said, I'm really thankful that I'm able to be in a group with you guys and hear your thoughts, because I truly learned a lot from you guys and just hearing your perspectives about all the reading throughout the semester. And it allowed me to think on so many different levels about the material that we've had. So I really appreciate your guys' vulnerability and honesty. And yeah, I can't wait to talk about more of this in class. That's my last time saying that. I know I say it at every end of every video, but yeah, thank you guys so much, and I can't wait to hear your guys' thoughts in class.